women in Blackdom, and excuse me, you have an interesting and really pretty personal chapter in the book about the role of women in this town. I'm wondering if you could talk a bit, in particular, about why you wrote this chapter, and really much of the book itself, but this chapter in particular in such a fascinatingly personal way, and maybe just talk a little bit more as well about the history of women in Blackdom too.
Well, let's just say, as the artist here first, is the reason why it's so personal, because I'm in the process of writing about two women, and I could not step away, as the historian is supposed to, from the story of my mother and my grandmother, right? My mother is more like MIDI. I mean, metaphorically, like MIDI, and then my grandmother is more like the church lady. I mean, she literally is the church lady. So in doing that, I also felt like I could bring people into this history that I am also being introduced to, and then kind of introduce them to me as the writer as well. So by doing that, I was hoping to inspire more people to write these kinds of stories, where it's okay to tell the story, give us a context to understand why you're creating this kind of history this way. I am not a woman, female, presenting person. I am a male, masculine man who was trained to be a patriarch in a very anemic patriarchal society that had matriarchs who also had their own place in space. Right? Like if I'm thinking like that as a philosopher, as a person who's writing, it's really difficult for me to tell the story of black women. But I can't not, because you can't tell the story of Blackdom without at least trying to tell the story of black women. And so I had to get a little vulnerable. And, historians refuse at all cost to entertain getting vulnerable. But I got vulnerable because my mom passed at the beginning of the COVID in February, right before the March shutdown. And then my grandmother with her Alzheimer's. So I'm thinking in terms of memorializing. And so it's hard for me to quote, shake that and write this story about black women in Blackdom when not. So that's kind of why it's built the way that it is. But it's also a way so that I can humanize Mitty more, or my mother. Humanizing Mitty allows for Blackdom's story to be told. I'll give you one quick example of what I mean. I was talking to black folks who wanted to do a thing about Blackdom, and I sent them about Mitty, a story where there was only one sentence in there about Mitty, and they wanted me to take out that one sentence about Mitty because it looked bad on the black community. You get what I'm saying? So you have to leave out sections of the community if you leave out Mitty. So that's partly why. And similarly, if I'm being vulnerable again, if we leave out Mitty, then we leave out my mother, right? So I made it personal in a way that, we could all benefit by telling her story, so.
That's a fabulous answer, and I think you're totally right that historians, and I count myself in what I'm about to say, we do have a tendency to not want to get vulnerable about these things, and I feel as though as a profession, as a discipline, as a group of writers and all that, we've moved pretty far away from the idea of objective eye in history. That's not something that we try to do, but I think you're right that in writing my own work, I do have this kind of knee-jerk reaction to not put myself and as a character in there, even though I'm the one that's doing the interpreting. So I wanted to ask about that chapter in particular because it got me thinking about my own role in my own writing in kind of an interesting way. So thank you for kind of elucidating that a bit. That was very interesting. So, and I'm going to ask you to do something difficult here, and that's kind of go over 30 years of history in a short period of time. But, I'm curious, what is the arc of Blackdom's story? When and why did this community kind kind of reach its boom years? And then why did it kind of, whatever word you want to use, collapse or fade away?
I'm so glad you began to complicate that already by saying, it collapsed, that kind of stuff. Like a lot of people say that it ended. It did not end. It's still here today. That's the complicating factor. But I'm going to give you the 30 years, and then I'm going to try to wrap up with a larger context. So it's as simple as 13 black men in 1903 walked into the county clerk's office in Chavez County and incorporated the Blackdom Townsite Company. The government wanted to shore up the border region around 1909, 1910, because, well, you had a revolution building, right? So you had the Mexican Revolution happening, and so, you have the Desert Lands Act, right? Or the area you can get, you can go from 160 to 320 up to 640 acres of desert, hard to irrigate land. And so that spurs the revival, of the Blackdom idea. It was languishing a little bit. There were people who homesteaded, but then when they said that you can get up to a square mile, that brought in a lot of women too, because it also allowed for assignee privileges. In other words, it opened up desert lands to more black people. And since the Blackdom experiment was already happening, 1903, 1909, it started a revival. New Mexico statehood, 1912, and that gave black folks a sense of urgency, and so they were booming by 1911. We could talk about droughts, but I leave them out because that didn't stop the project. 1917, World War I, the town shifts to a patriotic town, right? So a lot of the women, for example, moved into the town and did war work, sewing and knitting scrubs for the front lines. A couple young men from the town got drafted from the town, from Blackdom. And so, the older military men prepared the younger military men to be drafted. And then War I is over, 1918, 1919, boom. Blackdom oil starts. And so this is after a time when women had included themselves in the homestead class in Blackdom. And so now you have boom time starting in 1920. Well, this is also the Roaring 20s and the Harlem Renaissance. So black folks, or Blackdomites at this time, had started advertising themselves in the Crisis magazine. Well, if you understand the popularity of Crisis magazine, you understand that they were this is like Black Twitter, or this is the place. So it becomes well known pretty quickly, and then they sell the church immediately in 1922. Well, now we're talking about the rise of the Ku Klux Klan at the same time, right? The rise of fascism and so on. So black folks did what they normally do, which is go underground. After they sold their church in 1922, but if you look at the land records, exponentially the land mass increased. So they stayed underground while leasing their land to oil speculators, took the royalty checks, and then started themselves in a new place, whether it's Roswell, Las Cruces, Los Angeles, Compton. They just decided to move out and use the royalties to fund a new life somewhere else. So that's the 30-year trajectory. It's somewhat, it dissolved, let's just say it dissolved in 1903 as a town, but it existed in the form of oil royalties, at least into the post-World War II era. And currently they are pumping petroleum/nat gas from Blackdom lands today. And currently today, the original families of Blackdom still own miles and miles of land. It's just a lot of it has been put in situations. So there's a current situation the land is in. So that's the 30 years plus now.
That was a great overview, and like I kind of alluded to when I asked the question, you also gestured toward the fact that this place has afterlives, right? That it ended, quote unquote, but did it really end? I'm not totally sure, right? That this story goes on up through today in very real material ways too.
Yeah. So, so after my, with your dissertation, you do exactly what they tell you, and so I got the time period 1900 1930. But as I started doing my own research, as people like to do today, in 1936, the Blackdom serenaders sang at the Juneteenth celebration in Oklahoma. Now, this is 6 years after I say that Blackdom ceased to exist. But if you look closer at the book, there is Blackdom and then there is, quote, Blackdom, or Blackdom in quotes, right? Because there is the idea of Blackdom that continues to this day. There's the idea of Blackdom that ended up as like I said, the Blackdom Serenaders, or if you went to Arizona, you would find the Blackdom Real Estate Company. So Blackdom ended up as a part of a military unit in the Philippines, I believe. So Blackdom definitely continues to exist, and you'll see it in various ways. And so that is how I then begin to describe what the Afro-Frontier is. That's where the Afro-Frontier becomes significant, because you can see how even though the town was destroyed, the people were not destroyed. And so Afro-Frontier begins to encompass that, the signified notions.
So as we begin to wrap up here, I always like to ask my guests to kind of take a 30,000-foot view on their book, or another way to put it is to kind of think about their book from another perspective, and imagine yourself as someone who, picks this book off the shelf and reads it and then puts it back on the shelf. Let's say a year or even 5 years on down the line, what would you hope that reader would remember or take away from your book?
First, that Blackdom was a real place. Second is that race doesn't exist, but racism does. Okay, so that's why at the beginning of the book I'm talking about the intellectual technology, right? Because if I am going to go down the rabbit hole of talking about, quote, black people, we already know that race doesn't exist. We've gone through the Human Genome Project. We know that there is no markers for race, and that we all are a mixture of us. Okay, but for census purposes, black folks, then I had to redesign. And so the takeaway from this book is, if we are going to talk black folks, there is a signature way to talk about black folks without reducing the dynamism of who they are, and what they did, even in places so remote as a Blackdom, New Mexico, in a place that still doesn't exist, but yet you still see their humanity, right? So in evoking that humanity, I also poured a little bit of my humanness in this work of mine. So I hope I modeled also the humanity, talking in the vulnerable parts that you describe. So the takeaway is how history can be both objective and subjective at the same time, and actually allow us to embrace the history a little bit closer, right? To see ourselves through the lens of other people. Because if you only see it as a story of black people and, quote, you are a, quote, white person, then you're gonna miss the point, right? You're gonna miss the point that race doesn't exist. So anyone can actually experience this description of Blackdom, because utopia is a very well understood concept, no matter who you are. It's a human thing, right? So yeah, that's one of them.
That's great, and that description of history as both objective and subjective at the same time. It's something I've tried to explain to my students so much in like much more convoluted ways. I feel like just saying it exactly like that's exactly it, right? So thanks for giving me a new tool in my toolbox to throw out next time in the classroom. Yeah. For my last question, I always like to get a preview from my guests of what they are working on next. I know that this book has only been out a year, but I'm curious if there's any projects that you want to plug, or just kind of give us a preview of anything that might be coming down the line for it.
I'll give you the next book, but I want you to understand that my social media is a digital installation, okay? Now, I'm not saying go to any particular one, but if you want to see it just regularly, you can either Google Afro-Frontier and look up pictures, and you can find a lot of my stuff. But what I'm doing in this next book is a director's cut of this book. So we talked about being vulnerable, right? So in this book, you get a picture of me as vulnerable. Now you're going to see me as if it was a movie. So I'm writing this same book as if it was a movie. It sounds convoluted because I just started. Like you said, I just finished this last book, but I had so much primary source material that I left out of this book because I only wanted to focus on my dissertation topic rather than all of the material, that I had a whole nother 2 books. Because think about it. If you have a black woman in the Wild West, Madam Bootlegger Gunslinger, and she also is the largest landowner in an oil company, that deserves its own book, right? And so if you have the oil company, that deserves its own book. So I had so much material that I wanted to do a director's cut, so that there's the book cast, and then there's the movie Origin by Ava DuVernay. So I want to write the book so that Ava DuVernay can just pick up the book and go, oh, I can go ahead and just make this movie now. Do you get what I'm saying? So the book that I'm writing tries to encapsulate all of that with all of the templates of writing a movie. So it's to try to draw you in as if it's a movie so that you can picture it in your own head. Right? So
yeah. That sounds fantastic, and I can't wait to see it for myself. So I hope that you're making active progress on it.
Yes. So it sounds crazy right now. So that's what it sounds like in my head too. So.
Dr. Timothy Nelson is a multidisciplinary historian and scholar and writer and artist whose latest book is Blackdom, New Mexico, The Significance of the Afro-Frontier 1900 to 1930, which came out with Texas Tech University Press last year in 2023. Thanks so much again for joining me today, Timothy.
Thank you for having me.
Doesn't have a good contrast to show you what like. How about this? Google Roswell Correctional Center. I just want to take you to Blackdom real quick. I think I have like 50 minutes.
Timothy, if you're feeling rushed, don't feel rushed.
Okay.
Correct? Yeah, don't feel rushed.
Okay.
I'd be really interested to hear what the students feel about how they feel after reading your article, and I want to know what they got from your article.
Okay. So what I have done, Roswell Correctional Center. What I have done is taken Google Earth and put crayons all over it so that you all can see what it looks like. Now, can y'all see that? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. All right, so I'm gonna back out. Has anyone ever heard of Roswell? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Heard of Roswell? Aliens? Yeah. Aliens? You never heard of? You heard of aliens? Okay. Aliens? Roswell? Okay. Y'all gotta look up that, because that's the legend. Now, my conspiracy theory that they talk about aliens out in Roswell is that those aliens were black people. And they just didn't want to
Talk about it.
So, okay, we're up here in Santa Fe. Wait, that's Abiquiu. See Santa Fe up here? Okay, a little bit. Hold on. This is where we are. Okay, now I'm gonna back out, and so we're going south. Now, this area over here is where Jim Crow ended. That was like a buffer zone between Texas and New Mexico. And the Pecos River was the Jim Crow line, okay? So, that Jim Crow line, Pecos River, 3 miles, this is the Pecos, 3 miles is where Frank Boyer decided to homestead, right? Before New Mexico was a state, so he's a founding landowner, okay? Now, Blackdom, 285. Now, you notice 285 is over here too. 285 takes you directly to Blackdom. Why is that? The Masonic Lodge. So you can see these Masonic lodges every town you go in. Or every town you go in, you will know because they will have the placard that shows the Masonic symbol with the, the thing here. And you know what I'm talking about, Masonic symbol?
Can you explain what Masons, like Freemasons, like a little bit of like
Explain Freemasons.
or like how they like what they do and
That's a whole semester class.
yeah, no, I know, but like just in general, I think it's a term that a lot of us don't know.
All right, so Freemasonry is a very old club, okay, and it really started off with Masons, like stone Masons, okay. But what they found is that when they did all of their work, there were certain philosophies that were true outside of the physical into the philosophical. So Freemasonry professionalized that philosophy and turned it into something that is now global, and they have realms in which they have dominion over in their minds. But I mean, actually have power too. I mean, you see that there's a Grand Lodge there. So their power is wielded through their Masonic lodges. What do? I don't know. I'm not a Freemason. They wouldn't let me. Seriously, I tried to. I digress. I'll tell you about me trying to become a Freemason later. But it's a clearinghouse for power. So we have a presidential candidates going up, right? They all came through a funnel, except the Republican presidential candidate. His funnel is totally different. That's why you have the kind of chaos that you have, where Republicans are going, that dude is not, he didn't go through the funnel, right? That's kind of what's happening. And so you have Republicans switching
He
to
kind
the
of
other
did.
side.
I think the KKK is still
See,
part of the funnel, because he's third generation
his
KKK.
funnel came through more of what you see with Freemasonry, where I have a certain power outside of the politics. I didn't have to go through everybody's stuff. So if you look at the correctional center here, and you probably already found it, if you go over a mile or so, you're gonna find this gate. And this gate, let me see, this gate is why none of us can go to Blackdom. That's flat, huh? You see all the way to Santa Fe from there.
So they call this area Little Texas? Someone here was talking about being from Texas.
Yeah.
And how far away is Blackdom from Juarez?
200 miles. So that gate right there keeps us from Blackdom. The actual Blackdom.
There's still
And Blackdom well.
there are
But-
descendants that still own land.
But families still own land, and they're still pumping gas out of Blackdom. Okay?
Natural gas,
Nat gas.
not oil. Well,
And
that we
so
know
it's
of.
still- yeah. I'm going to show you that just so you'll have an idea that Blackdom still exists. So nat gas is being pumped. That's a nat gas well on the Heron family land. So we're gonna be going to Roswell, meeting with the Heron family, and we're gonna be looking at these lands. So, you know, if anyone wants to take a trip out to Roswell and the alien museums, you know, we're gonna be out there sometime in October.
Get
But
my,
anyway, y'all
get my
have read the
email, and if you're
article.
interested, let me know.
Yeah, y'all have read the article. Anything y'all want me to talk about? Because I could literally talk all day for a whole semester. Give me what you got. Why do you think New Mexico decides not to tell everybody that black folks struck oil? Is it important? Is it significant?
I kind of want to say probably for competition and ego, because it's like, oh, they were the first ones to actually discover instead of us. And we're like, probably that, and try to wipe that.
Well, they weren't the first
There
ones.
is a level of ego, and definitely, because think about it. You have black people. Now, how old is New Mexico as a state?
Blackdom folks were
It
not the first
became a
ones.
state when? 1912. Why did it take so long for New Mexico to become a state? There weren't enough. Yeah. So they had to create them. How did they create white people?
They open the scope of what's considered white, basically.
To whom?
I don't know, people like Irish people or Jewish.
Not Irish yet, because they were Catholic. Mexicans.
Okay.
Even though they were, quote, Catholic too.
Oh yeah, Mexicans are considered as.
Oh yeah, come on with it. Yeah, come on with it. You know what I'm
the
talking.
Mexican Revolution,
Yeah.
because back then they were like one of them.
Oh,
But then once the Mexican Revolution happened, then that's when like, oh no, they're not white.
Mexican Revolution, 1910. New Mexico becomes a state, 1912. By 1920, Mexicans were still putting in the census records MEX. You know what they did when Mexicans put Mexican in there? They crossed over it and put W.
And they still do that, just
I think
FYI.
they
And so what you will find is that when you have, quote, Hispanics, Latino, Mexican, you will see that box checked for white. Now, you will also see black folks checking that box for white, particularly if they are Belizean or from Dominican Republic.
Or
Oh,
Puerto
you
Rico.
get what I'm saying when I say that on the East Coast, when I say Dominican. You know what I'm talking about there, right? Puerto Ricans will still say, check the box. Why? Because nobody wants to be treated like black folks. Or indigenous people, or as they put in here, Indians, right? No one wants to be treated like that. But do black people exist?
Not outside the U.S.
Huh?
Not outside this
Not
country.
outside, I'm not outside this colonial project. Well, how
In South America.
in South America, colorism?
But even
It's
then,
definitely in Brazil, right? But it's different. It's a caste system versus a race system,
yeah.
right?
Because even like in Belize, while we have cities like a different color than me, it's just Belizeans. It's not that you're black, you're white. You're just Belizean. You're not separated by colors.
So what you have here is a emphasis on forcing that black-white divide. Why is that important? Because of the tricultural narrative that exists here that doesn't quite exist in other places. The tricultural narrative, anyone heard of it? Say it, what is it?
Is it indigenous white now?
Indigenous, not black.
Spanish and white.
Yep.
There you go. Where are black folks in there? See, in the tricultural narrative, there's indigenous, Spanish, and white. Do white people exist?
They do as a way to like keep their superiority.
Yes.
Who is they if they don't exist? No, I'm saying yes, but I want us to continue that thought. So now you have to force people
To choose.
to not just choose but enforce it on other people. Has anyone, go ahead.
I feel like you see that very often because what people consider white people now is different. Like, they didn't consider Italians white, they didn't consider Jewish people white. Jewish people were subjugated to like hate by white people, but now they consider them.
That's where the alliance between Jews and blacks came and during the 1920s because there's no such thing as white people. So now you gotta make it up. Well, what you see in New Mexico is a constant emphasis on trying to make it up. But it's difficult. So you go to Espanola on a good Sunday when all those lowriders come out. Okay?
Should we come to Espanola on a Sunday?
If they have,
Yeah, there's gonna be, I'll send you some stuff.
Okay, cool.
And that John that I,
Yeah.
I'll send you some stuff, because I think there's gonna be a lowrider weekend anyway.
Cool.
and what you will see is an emphasis that we are neither black nor white. And that's the constant tension that you will feel here. So when we're talking about Blackdom, and I'm saying it succeeded, they will say it failed. Go ahead.
I'm just like, maybe a little bit of like a bird's eye question to bring us back from some of the things you were doing in the beginning. You were asking, you know, racial identities and so forth and so on. And then in your narrative here, I think one of the things that you're trying to suggest is something that oftentimes maybe we don't want to admit to, which is that white folks, colonization and the process of colonization, the bodies that took part in that project looked different than just the way that I look, or something like that. And so on the one hand, I could see a conservative reading of that being like, look, you did it too. Right?
Yes.
Like, you know, stop all this like
It gets
cultural
complicated.
victimhood shit, and like you're somewhere probably can trace power and so forth and so on. But I think your project is trying to do something else vis-a-vis ideas of static notions of identity. And so I'm just wondering, like, the push of the work, the history itself is its own project. But I think there's this other thing about racial identities and racial formations, and I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about, so we don't walk out here being like, you know.
Somebody said it. to wrap that part up. So,
yeah.
what is a bigger question? Like, give me a bigger question that we all can hear that question and I
Can I
answer
just
that
leave
question.
to what I think he's trying to get at without, I think, okay. So basically, what we've been told is the greatest colonizer is the white man, right? So then we fall into, we've been victimized as black, as indigenous, as Mexican, as what, but our people were colonizers too, okay? So our people had ambitions to conquer lands and find new places for whatever reason, famine, climate change, because this climate change thing isn't just a new thing, this is a constant thing. So people are constantly seeking out places where they can take care of themselves and their families and flourish. That is just not a white person thing. Is that basically kind of what?
That's a part of it.
Okay.
The reason I bring up this race thing in particular is because, one, you're the generation that's supposed to fix the problem.
That's a lot of
why I bring
pressure.
it up. And I want you all to actually engage the question. Okay? Because you're going to need to. That's what has to happen. Now, if white people exist, and I'm just going to go down this thought process. Okay? If white people exist, how do you define them? Okay. We know that there's a mushy definition. If black people exist, how do you define them? Okay. Now, how does that connect to the politics of you today? Because see, when I'm talking about Blackdom, it happened 100 years ago. But there's a politics today that is directly connected to the racialization, militarization, and the policing of bodies that could not pass or get credit for being, quote, white because of the colonization, right? So, if you see yourself as one of these made-up categories, white, black, you're going to come fight for it, right? Okay. So if I tell you a history that I say black people in the 1920s, now this was the rise of the second wave of the Ku Klux Klan. They owned all of America through these Masonic lodges and everything. And I tell you that black folks created a town, were successful, struck oil. How are you going to believe that if you believe black people exist? Because black has a very particular connotation. Now, when I say black, what do you see in your head? What is the first thing you see in your head? Black person. What's the first black person that comes to your head?
Like someone brown skin.
First black person that pops in your head. You? First black person that pops in your head. First black person.
Michael Jackson.
So when we're talking about, the reason I'm bringing up race when I'm talking about Blackdom is because Blackdom was a place for black people, but really it was a place for people who could not claim whiteness. The largest, go ahead.
No, I'm just gonna finish.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, I think that connects really well to what Marissa was saying here, which is to suggest that, like, for those people that couldn't claim whiteness, there were certain processes that were available that interpolated them into being colonizers. So it's sort of like the situation one finds oneself in, which is to take care of family and to try to make sure that, I don't know, people aren't going to kill you and so forth and so on, sometimes leads you to do things that...
Exactly.
Well, can you imagine being Frank Boyer, half a generation out of slavery, because he was the youngest of how many kids?
Frank Boyer, he was the 16th child or 17th
And he
child?
was born out of slavery, half a
He was the
generation.
first one born free.
And he was a Buffalo Soldier, and he was a border patrol while they were trying to create this new border, right? Mexico, US. And so can you imagine what it was like for him to have to manage the bodies of black and brown people as he was supporting this colonization of what we know as white people or white supremacy? Like, that had to be a difficult thing, right?
Yeah, of course.
And that is why I mentioned it, because I don't want you to be here in the borderlands and think in terms of black and white. If you go, every space you go into in New Mexico has this tension happening. Yes, you will find, quote, Hispanics for Trump, even though Trump is currently seen through the lens of white supremacy, in case that's the way he wants to be seen, right? But you still have that. Why? Because there is a category where Indigenous, Mexicanos, Latinos, Hispanos can fit into whiteness. Because it doesn't exist, there's a power base for it.
And we code switch too in New Mexico. Just know we code switch.
And understand that code switch isn't just from
we know when we have to use our
white.
salad fork, for example. We know when we have to let go of our accent.
And when I gotta jump in my lowrider.
Right.
See, there's a third space. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say something, and to bring it back, because you had sort of brought up Israel and Palestine, and I am anti-Zionist, and I think that what the Israeli government is doing is genocide and is a puppet of the West in so many ways. But if you were to ask me in 1930, and I was living in where my grandparents were from in the Ukraine, that we're gonna go and we're gonna like have a sovereign state and we're gonna like take care of our own shit and stop having to like be nervous that people are gonna try to kill us, I probably would have been like, put me on the boat.
Right.
And if you'd asked me,
Me too.
and if I was there with my grandparents in 1930, even in Blackdom or in Fort Worth, where my parents are from, and they were talking about, I would be the same thing, because black folks were Zionists too. Why? Because they saw themselves through the lens of the children of Israel, right? This goes back to a narrative, an internal narrative that black folks have that is very much connected to Judaism, Judeo-Christianity. So when I don't know how many people here read the Bible, but in the Bible you have Moses. Moses led the children of Israel. Black folks just got out of slavery, 1865, and so in order to have an internal narrative to do something besides stay and sit on, remember, in the Granger's Order number 3, which is what Juneteenth is about, it says, stay where you are, be quiet, and be an employee now. You're free, but you're free to be an employee. And I can show you Granger's Order, but I suggest you read it and understand that you were only free to be an employee and or maybe own a little land. That was it, right? But the people in Blackdom saw themselves through the lens of a Moses and Joshua. So Moses, he dies before he enters the promised land, but he carries them through the wilderness to the River Jordan. So the River Jordan becomes the place between the old and the new. The new is the promised land. Well, in New Mexico, once you cross the Pecos River, it is like crossing the Jordan River. And now there's no Jim Crow on that side. So that's why I'm bringing this up, because if you are in New Mexico and you let go of the black-white binary and you allow that third space to emerge, the indigeneity, the Spanish, and I'm not talking about the Spanish where people are talking about they're white and that kind of thing. I'm talking about the Spanish, like you'll see in the housing or in the way that certain houses are.
Can I give my example of what you guys just gave?
Go ahead.
Okay, so my family are from Powakanambe, which there are also reservations there. Okay?
Explain what Powakanambe is.
Well, but they're indigenous spaces, so
Okay.
there's pueblos and reservations. So, but my family is mixed with Spanish, probably even some German, probably even some Jewish, right? Mixed with in this space, so we're very mixed. Well, those of us that are light-skinned probably chose whiteness to survive this American colonization, and we had to make choices. So I'm assuming sort of similar, we had to make these choices that right now, the big fight in Santa Fe, there's a fight right now, and there's been people here that have been trying to divide indigenous people and Spanish mixed people, because there's a whole recolonization going on here. So I invite you to question everything you see as art, as everything, as you're here, and don't get caught up in the one or the other. Know that there's this intersection of people that had to let go of their identities and their family. Like, it's complicated.
Jewish migrants, when I was talking about the black conquistadors from West Africa, you have Jewish conquistadors coming through as well. What you find is a Judaism in Mexico well before this thing we call America. Why? Because like you were describing, colonization, as we have been, it's been said, like when we watch Wakanda, right? The colonizer, and they're only talking about white people. Well, we're not talking about the black folks who were colonizers too. I can describe to you Liberia, where black folks from here decided that they were going to go to Africa and colonize Africans and turn them into better people.
And then we had the Japanese concentration camps here, and then we had the Irish folks that were brought to Mexico, and right?
So there's a
Dr. Timothy E. Nelson was born in South Central Los Angeles, and he was raised in Compton, California in the early 1990s. And he went to Santa Monica Community College due to race and class-based conflict with the Los Angeles Police Department. His multifaceted work concerns racism, ambition, and the search for opportunity. Providing the most in-depth research on Blackdom to date, he reframes the history, focusing on the economic and the social ambitions of Afro-Frontierists, or Black pioneers. And he does this through various art forms: academic books, trade books, screenplays, painting, photography, and videography. Dr. Nelson is digitally applying his theory of colonization within the digital frontier. Let's welcome Dr. Nelson.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to